So, good day. We're here learning Tanya psychology. We're on page Vov, about to finish the first chapter. We are on the first line, the last two words, V'gam midas toivos. That's where we're at. But before that, just to not only recap, but really spend a few minutes on some of the ideas that we learned yesterday. We went rather fast at the end, so I want to just go back. The Alter Rebbe here brings something that the Reb Chaim Vital was the closest pupil and student of the Arizal, and it's his writings that identify for us where the Arizal said are many, or maybe most, of the Mekaymes HaKadoshim, the holy sites in Eretz Yisrael, that all of us go to, and you live there. I'm not talking about the biblical, places near in Bet Shemesh or near Bet Shemesh, the Kiryat Yaorim, and with the Aron past, and all those things. That's biblical in Tanakh. Talking about Tanoim, Amaroyim, where they're buried, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, and etc. Pekian, Yashan. There's a lot of places. So, if Reb Chaim Vital would not tell us and share with us that the Arizal said, here is this where this Tana lies, and here's what this Amoid is, we wouldn't know. So Reb Chaim Vital is credited really for being the one to tell us what the Arizal said about those Mekaymes HaKadoshim, and that's a very important thing. But in addition to that, Reb Chaim Vital was a Talmud Chacham, a great person, and a Makubal. So the Alter Rebbe quotes him in the name of the Arizal that every Yid has two neshamas. So first of all, the idea is not unique to Chabad, to the Balatanya. The idea starts already from the Arizal. So it's very important to know that. The concept of a Jew having what we call two souls, two neshamas, is not Chabadi, it's Yehudi, it's Arizal. Now, if you don't accept the Arizal, you don't follow the Kabbalah and all that, that's a different story, but that's important to know when you discuss these things with others and yourself. Okay, number two, he quotes a pasuk regarding the neshama, and the pasuk. He says the neshama sani asisi. I sent yesterday. Yonason, did you get it? I sent on the group the source. It's in Yeshaya, I think, Mem Gimel. I'll look it up over there. The pasuk. If you didn't see it, Yonason, you asked me a question, so I sent it on the group. Okay. So you have the source, the citation, and the lashon of the pasuk. And the Alter Rebbe quotes the pasuk to support the Arizal. But the Alter Rebbe makes one nuance that is not in the Arizal, as far as I know, and that is shehein shtei nefashos. These refers to two souls. In other words, the meaning in Hebrew of the word nefesh and the word neshama in classical biblical Hebrew, in Talmudic literature, is the same, soul. But in Hebrew, it's two different words, nefesh and neshama. So you have to ask yourself, what's the difference? And we're not the first one to ask and to analyze Torah that way. The Radak does it already, the commentator on Tanakh. Then later, the Malbim in the 1800s, the famous Malbim, he does it, and kind of his entire sefer, which is a wonderful sefer and commentary on Torah, is heavily based on the language. So what we learn here in Tanya, that the Alter Rebbe says shehein shtei nefashos, obviously, he's making a point, and I told you yesterday that technically what the Alter Rebbe is saying, technically, is the following, that not everyone merits to have an experience of the level of their soul called neshama. Since there are 5 levels, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, yechida, the acronym of which is naran chai, the level of neshama is a very high level, just leave it at that. And not everyone has that shine into their body and shine into their nefesh elokis. Needless to say, to their nefesh abamis. For that, you need a schus, or you need a gift from God. What level does Kabbalah say is accessible to every yid? Nefesh. What is the difference? I didn't say this yesterday. I'm going to tell you now, and it's important, David, because this will be good for the rest of your life when you learn Chassidus. What's the difference between these 5 levels? Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. Nefesh is the lowest because it represents action, this world. You don't need to be a world's genius to put on a pair of tefillin or to give tzedakah. You just got to do. Okay. Ruach is spirit. Ruach represents midos, emotions, feelings. You can put on tefillin and you feel dull and bored and it's like nothing. You want to feel something, you have to develop and work on your feelings, emotions. So that's ruach. In other words, if a person is living with the ruach within their neshama, they're not only serving God by acting, doing, the emotional component is active as well. That's ruach. Neshama, the third aspect of the soul, the neshama, that represents seichel, intellect. Not only do you do with your hands, and do you feel with your heart and the emotions, but you actually understand. And I'm not talking here about, I want to make this clear, that, when you learn something or you read something, I understand it. We're talking about a spiritual understanding, a deep understanding that transcends just, a cursory reading and understanding of something. That's not, you don't need to be, that doesn't prove yet you're learning with neshama. What does it mean that your neshama within you, the 3rd level, is active? This means that your mind becomes permeated with godliness, with God consciousness, so that when you understand something with your seichel, what happens is God's kind of seichel, God's intellect, permeates your mind, and your mind now is a godly understanding. Maybe later we'll talk more about it as we learn the Tanya, because this needs more clarification, but I want to go on. Then there is the 4th level called Chaya. What does Chaya mean? Life. Chayas. Life. Isser, right? Chaya, Chassidus says, refers to the Rotzoin. The Rotzoin, the willpower within the individual. In the willpower, it's much more than just doing, it's much more than feeling, and it's even much more than understanding. Willpower is determination that whether you do understand it, you don't understand it, whether you do what you want to do, you don't want to do. The willpower drives the individual to the point where they do what God wants. And willpower, and therefore willpower, is not an easy thing, as we all know. It's difficult. But when you experience and you live your life with, or part of your life, or at certain times with Ratzon, you're accessing Chaya Sheben Neshama, the Chaya within your soul. And then there's finally Yechida. Yechida is oneness, Yachid. Nothing else is there. It's just Yachid. That's already Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, where even if you don't do and you don't feel and you don't understand and you don't have the willpower, somehow you do it. It moves you. Why? Because you're just one with God. And the classical example is during the Holocaust. This is from the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he was standing with other Jews who were not observant, and the bombs were flying overhead, and they said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And these people that he talks about, they weren't people who were going to shul every day. They were secular and probably anti-religion. But yet, what happened here? Their Pintel Yid, their essential, quintessential Jewish neshama was touched. That's Yechida. And I would say that when someone is touched to come back to Yiddishkeit or to Chassidishkeit, where they were living another type of lifestyle and they, were enjoying it or not, but, there wasn't, and all of a sudden they're moved, whether they were moved in a way that was very drastic, whether they moved in a gradual way. At the end of the day, it comes from Yechida. Ne'ilah, for example, is the fifth tefillah, right? So Ne'ilah corresponds to Yechida. Kol Nidre is Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, the five tefillos, the five prayers. On Yom Kippur, it's brought in the Svarim, HaKadoshim, and the Holy Svarim, that Yechida is represented by Ne'ilah. What's Ne'ilah? What's Ne'ilah, Isser? Ne'ilah is, hey, it's the last time we can get in. Talking about, traditionally. The doors are open, the Aron Kodesh is open, doesn't get shut the whole time. You don't open and close it like you do throughout davening on Yom Kippur. It stays open, and everyone knows the great schus of buying the opening of Ne'ilah. It's a big, big, big schus. Because the feeling is, I'm in the ark with God. That's the emotions, right? Yechida. There's no one else around. It's my private bedroom. No one else. No one else. That's Yechida. These are the 5 levels. So Neshama, forget about Chaya and Yechida. Talk about Neshama. Neshama is already a very, very high level. And the Alter Rebbe says, we do not expect, and nor is it the reality, that every Jew, i.e. the Beinani, the prototype of this Sefer Tanya, the average Jew, is living with Neshama. They're not. They're not. One second. Their mind and their seichel is their seichel. It's human intelligence, understanding a piece of Gemara. To tell me that the human intelligence becomes God intelligence, no. Yes, Moshe.
Yeah, Rabbi Dalfin, just question, just to go back for a second. we define ruach as emotion, if I'm correct. Neshama as seichel, chaya as life, ratzon, and yechida, we just spoke about the private moment with God. Can we go back just to what I'm saying, to nefesh, the very beginning?
Nefesh is the basic level of living, action, of being alive, without any necessarily feelings and understanding, just doing. Maisa. So in Hebrew, Moshe, nefesh represents action, maisa. To do.
Right.
So in other words, the fact that a person is alive because God gives them chayas, that's it. Without, you feel, you don't feel, you understand, you don't understand, you're willing to give your life for God, you want to be private with God. No. Well, that's already different animations and levels. So nefesh is considered the basic level that every Jew has. For that matter, every person has.
Okay. Do we make a distinction between the first 3, nefesh, ruach, neshama, and then chaya and yechida?
The answer is yes. Yes. Nefesh, ruach, neshama is what we call in Chassidus koiches pnimiyim, inner, compartmentalized faculties. whereas Chaya Echida called Koiches Makifim, periphery, all-encompassing, equal, distant throughout. The willpower of the foot, the willpower of the mind, the willpower of any other part, the pleasure of the mind, the pleasure of the foot. But I don't want to really give a shir about that now, but the answer is yes. There's a difference between Naran and Chai. Okay. Now, the Alter Rebbe, so therefore, let's go back. So the Alter Rebbe says, Shehein shtei nefoshes. What he's telling us here is that every Jew has the basic two souls in the most basic way. Nefoshes, nefesh. In other words, there's an orientation of godly soul within a person, an orientation called nefesh habahamis, animalistic soul, within every single person. And as yesterday Isser asked the question, and we spoke about, even David HaMelech, he killed his Yetzer Hara. That means, to the point where he killed it, he obliterated it, that he had no trace whatsoever, no urge, but it came. Because a human being, you hear this? A human being, when they're born in this physical world, they're born with shtei nefoshes. So in other words, Isser, when the Arizal says that Echad Tzaddik, you see he says, Echad Tzaddik ve'echad Rasha. Just to continue on the line of your question, whether he's righteous, whether he's Rasha. That means even David HaMelech has shtei nefoshes. So how do you reconcile the two? If you're a tzaddik, how do you have two nefoshes? The answer is you're born with two nefoshes. And then you reveal the tzaddik within you, if you have that, to get rid of the Yetzer Hara. The Alter Rebbe, after he says shehein shtei nefoshes, he says, nefesh achas b'tzad ha'klipa v'sitra achra. One of these souls, it comes from the perspective of the husk, the klipa, like the husk of a fruit, covering the fruit, the negative side and the other side. Vihi, and it, hamislabeshes b'dam ha'odam. And it invests itself in the blood of man to sustain the body. And then he says, umimena, excuse me, this is the fourth line from the bottom on page 10, the second word, umimena bois kol hamidas rois. Now you ask the average person, what is the nefesh habamis? Tell me. They'll tell you all the character flaws that we have, from idle chatter to frivolity, to gaiva, to boasting, ego, on and on. It's all from the nefesh habamis. And is that true? The answer is yes, but not entirely correct. And why? Because the Alter Rebbe, before he says, mimeno, there's a vav, What does the vav imply? And from this soul comes about the ugly character traits. That means that before you get to the ugly character traits, say you're a young guy and you don't have yet these ugly character traits, you still were born with a nefesh habamis. Why? What is the downside of the nefesh habamis if you strip from it the midas ra'os? In other words, what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, this is very important, and this is an insight into Tanya that you only get from a tradition. I heard this from my teacher, Rabbi Yoel Kahn, who heard it from his teachers. And that is that what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is that independent of the midas ra'os, there's a problem with the nefesh habamis that we have, and that is that it's mislabeshet b'dam ha'adam lahachiyis aguf, and what do we walk around with just from that? Ego. Not ego because I know so much, or I'm so smart, or I'm so accomplished. No. The fact that you're alive and you think and you feel you're alive and you walk around that I am alive, that is Nefesh Habamis. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says, Umimeno, with the Vav, the Mimeno Bois Midas Rois is an afterthought. Only because we have a Nefesh Habamis that its issue, its core essence, what it is yesh, existence, do character flaws follow? So in other words, if we were to eliminate the feeling of yesh, just the essential idea that I exist, there wouldn't be the character flaws. The character flaws are a result of a core essential problem that's inherent to life. So it's like an oxymoron. On one hand, we say, the Arizal says, we're all born with this. Echad Tzaddik, v'echad Rasha has two souls. And one being the Nefesh Habamis, that means I'm born with it. And then you tell me that it brings about as well bad character. Why am I to blame? And the answer is you're not to blame. 1 second.
What came first, the chicken or the egg?
Exactly. The answer is you're not to blame, but that's who you are. If anyone you want to blame anyone, blame God, but it's not a blame game here. This is the reality. And this is a very important psychological insight and understanding humanity and human beings and the human species and the human nature, that human nature on its own, bereft of bad character and bad behavior and all of that, is problematic. So, well, I shouldn't be a human. Of course you should be a human. But recognize that if you don't change your humanity, you're in for a lot of issues later in life. And it's so deep. I'm not a psychologist, to have the right, words. I'm sure Dr. Twersky, actually, he spoke about this a little bit in the interview that I did with him. But, to find the right kind of psychological words and terms and ideas to express this idea. But I hope what I'm saying is clear. 1 second, Moshe, because it's yesodi, it's foundational. Not only will you learn Tanya, but in life. Because usually we identify ourselves and others with character issues, with flaws. And Chabad Hasidus, as the Alter Rebbe puts it in the first chapter in Tanya, this is the Yesod. For all of Tanya is, my dear friends, he's saying, my dear people, before we deal with problems and character flaws, which is in the books of Musar, this is a book of Hasidus. This is not a book of Musar. And in the book of Hasidus, we look at core issues outside of this negative and this problem, that problem. For that, go to a book of Musar, and Mesilas Yesharim would give you solid suggestions, important ones, how to improve yourself. Or Rabbeinu Yoina, if you want to go back 1,000 years, or Reishis Chochma. And over there, you'll find, rectification for your Averas and what Averas are and how bad Averas are. This is Hasidus. Tanya is Hasidus. Hasidus, it goes to the core element of the individual, which if you deal with that, then the issues that follow will be easier to be rid of, etc. Yes, Moshe.
I was just going to say the concept of how you put it, of changing one's refining one's behavior to be able to deal with humanity. So, mean, isn't that isn't that the Beinoni? Isn't that the idea?
Yes. That's the idea of the Beinoni, of the average person. That's right. And that's why not like Hillel, was thinking, that it's not applicable to us, the Beinoni, because it's so lofty. No. Dealing with the core issues for every average human being. Yes, Yonis.
Self-respect and self-confidence of the kid. So that's basically building the person, the person. Then Hasidus comes to this, okay, now we're going to knock it down. Now it's going to become bitter.
Right, but the Alter Rebbe...
Playing tennis. Now when you play tennis, you throw the ball up and you hit it. So what we're doing, we're building the person up.
Okay, Shikoya.
We say, listen, you've got to become fit.
Okay, exactly. Now put the mute on if you don't mind. So what we're saying is, thank you. So that's why the Alter Rebbe's language is V'hiya mislabeshes b'dam ha'adam. The fact that it's mislabeshes b'dam ha'adam, which is really a very interesting expression. I was thinking about it. Here we're talking about a soul. David, a soul is spiritual, right? What do you mean? The spiritual soul invests itself in the blood of man. Yeah, really? If I cut open my hand here and blood comes out, my soul is here. That's what it says. V'hiya mislabeshet b'dam ha'adam.
Rabbi, mislabeshet can mean it enveloped or it's not necessarily something internal. It's something, it could be like an atifa, like it's covered.
Well, I hear you. Yonason, can you mute yourself, please?
I do want to say something quickly.
Yes.
That it says in the Chumash that the dam hu hanefesh. And that's why we're not allowed to eat it.
I know what it says. I know it. Thank you. I know what it says. Alter Rebbe brings it. The question is, do you understand it? Does it make sense? When you learn in the Chumash, Adam hu hanefesh. The translation of which is that the blood of man is soul. But in that context, Yonason, it's not like spiritual. Dam hu hanefesh. Here in the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe is bringing it to support a spiritual idea, not a physical idea. And what is he saying? That the spiritual soul, because here he's talking about the spiritual soul. He's not talking about the goof. The spiritual soul is mislabeshet. And Yoni, to answer your question, the word mislabeshet, according in the literature of Torah, including Chassidus, refers to getting dressed up. When you dress up, you go into it, not atifa from the outside. That's why the language is mislabeshet. So again, maybe it's confusing with today's modern Hebrew or whatever, but in the language of Torah, Chassidus in particular, mislabeshet refers to an inside, a pnimiyut. I get involved, I get dressed up inside. Whereas what you said, atifa, is like from the outside. And what's the explanation? So what's the explanation? The explanation is I said. As soon as we're born with ego. The yesh, like Yonason said before. That's the Alter Rebbe's message. From birth. There's a famous Ralbag that my teachers shared with us when we started at Melech Tzvi B'Lov Sholem, Yonason, our Mashpia in Morristown, who knew him. And he was the first one. And it's from the Rebbe's Sikhs, but I never had heard it before. This was when we got to Morristown. So the Ralbag said, it's the Ralbag or no, I forget the name of the other sefer. Anyway, it says like this. Tinuk, Mishemaschel, Mishenoiled, Maschalis Yabish. An infant, from the moment of birth, begins to dry up. You hear the quote? Tinuk Mishenoiled Matchil Lityabesh. What's the point? Death begins at birth. Not death comes at 118. That's the conclusion of death. The beginning of death is the moment you're born. Why? What's the Havana? What's the deep understanding of that? That by the very nature that yesh is created, yesh is associated with drying up, dying, withering. Meaning that the issue of yesh is the problem. So ultimately, at the end of one's life, the yesh comes to its end. But we understand from this concept that it's a process throughout our lifetime of which we are to elevate and rectify and everything else. This is not said to be a morbid idea. Oh, I started to die when I was 1 day old. That's not. I mean, it sounds that way. Like, oh wow, what a religion I was born into. Thank you very much, right? Go out to a college campus and tell it to the young kids, right? They'll say, leave me alone with this religion. It's not something, but here we are, learning and davening with sure, older. To me, it's a very rich idea. Because if you understand, and that's what the Alter Rebbe says here, that's why I'm taking so much time and talking about this. The Alter Rebbe is saying here that the issue of mislabeshet b'dam ha'adam, in and of itself, independent of mimena bo'os midas rois, that from it comes this ugly character trait, this ugly anger and kas and gaiva and wasting time. No. Before all of that, just by existence, you got yesh. And you got problem. And you have to change it, and you can change it. Like Moshe said, this is the Avodah Beinani. What time is it?
It's 3:16.
I guess
Rabbi,
we didn't.
can I ask you a question?
1 sec. Yes, go ahead.